When I was young, my mother worked as a regional director for a retail chain that was rapidly expanding across the Northeast. The summer of 2003 was particularly hectic. She was overseeing a new location in a small Vermont town, and since the assignment would last through August, she decided to bring my father and me along. The company put us up in a colonial-style house on the outskirts of Montgomery Vale, a town of barely 2,500 people nestled in the Green Mountains. Our temporary home sat at the dead end of a lonely street in a half-finished development called Cedar Falls. The surrounding forest pressed in close, ancient hemlocks and sugar maples creating a wall of darkness beyond our yard. Most of the houses in Cedar Falls stood empty, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at the encroaching wilderness. The development company had only recently begun carving this neighborhood out of the dense forest, and there was something unsettling about how the neat rows of houses simply stopped at the tree line, as if the woods had refused to retreat any further. I was lucky enough to meet Alex, another 13-year-old who lived a few houses down. We bonded instantly over our shared love of mountain biking and our mutual boredom with the small town life. The local kids had created a network of dirt trails through the woods, and Alex showed me all the best routes. Montgomery Vale itself dated back to the 1780s, but offered little in the way of entertainment. One particularly dull Sunday afternoon, Alex and I found ourselves wandering through the town's tiny historical society museum. We were about to leave when I overheard an elderly visitor asking the curator about something called the Vanished Settlement. The curator dismissed it as local folklore, but those words sparked my curiosity like a match to dry timber. When I pressed Alex about the vanished settlement later, they were evasive, changing the subject with an uncharacteristic nervousness. It took 5 long weeks of summer before I finally got my answers. We were constructing a makeshift bike ramp over a narrow creek one humid afternoon when we noticed a group of teenagers heading off into the woods. They carried flashlights and contraband beer, their nervous laughter echoing through the trees as they tried to spook each other. I wonder where they're off to, I mused, watching Alex's face carefully. He stood up slowly, wiping sweat from his brow, expression suddenly serious. Oh, I think I know exactly where they're going. My heart quickened. Tell me. I think they're searching for that lost town. Alex's voice was heavy with reluctance. The what? Oh, come on. You've known more than you let on this whole time. I need to know, Alex. Please. I grabbed his shoulders in mock desperation, but there was real urgency behind my playful gesture. Alex picked up his bike and started walking down the trail. I followed, wheeling mine alongside. The lost town is more than just some local legend. Story goes that Montgomery Vale had a sister city nearby, somewhere deep in these woods. And then one day, I don't know, about like 150 years ago, the entire town just simply vanished. The people, the buildings, just gone. Nobody knows if the residents fled or died. Even the town's name was lost to history. Now it's like a rite of passage for local kids to go looking for it. Alex, we should... No. He whirled around to face me, eyes wide. Kid went searching for it in the 70s, never came back. They found his body a decade later, miles from anywhere. He got lost out there. I mean, it's easier than what you'd think. Everything looks the same in the forest after a while. But my mind was already racing with possibilities. That kid was probably high on something. It was the 70s. We're different. We're smarter now. Plus, I've got my dad's GPS he wouldn't even miss for a day. Alex stared at me curiously, momentarily distracted. Growing up in Montgomery Vale his whole life, he sometimes seemed charmingly naive about modern technology. Satellite navigation? I explained. Come on, Alex. It'd be an adventure. I should head back, he mumbled, checking his watch. Dad's taking me to a movie tonight. We rode in uncomfortable silence until we crossed the old train tracks, nearly buried beneath decades of vegetation. An idea struck me as I studied the rusted rails. Hey, I know you don't want to discuss it, but has anyone actually ever found anything out there? Alex hesitated. No, not really. Though my friend's older brother claims he once found human bones, but nobody believed him. Interesting. Where do most people look? Well, usually by the lake. He pointed left toward where he's seen the teenagers heading. It's pretty dense back there, but people figured if there was another town, they'd have built it near the water. So that's where everybody goes searching. Yeah, but Alex, that's exactly why we should follow these tracks instead, I said, gesturing to the rails beneath us. Think about it, they look ancient. Why would anyone lay tracks deep into these woods unless there was something worth reaching? Alex considered this, nodding slowly. That actually makes sense, though nobody ever follows the tracks that way. That's the direction the missing kid went. I wasn't deterred. In fact, I was more intrigued than ever. I wasn't swayed. 2 days later, I made my move. It was the weekend before we were set to move back home, and my parents were hosting a barbecue for my mother's new employees and some neighbors. While the adults mingled outside, Alex and I retreated to the cool darkness of the house, playing video games on my PlayStation and dancing around an unspoken attraction that had been building all summer. With only 5 days left before I moved away, there wasn't much left to lose. Now, I'd like to say my intentions were pure, but they weren't. I thought if I can make Alex want to impress me, he might agree to explore the tracks. The lost town had consumed my thoughts entirely. I'd spent every morning that week at the local library, searching through dusty records and finding nothing. But legends don't simply materialize from thin air. I was certain there was truth buried somewhere in those woods. I knew we had to leave by 2 p.m. to have enough daylight. My backpack was already packed. Water bottles, flashlight, camera, and a can of spray paint. I figured we'd need a way to tag our path if we strayed from the tracks. I thought I was being clever. None of it mattered in the end. I was such a fool. I set down my controller and I turned to Alex. You want to head out to the woods one last time? I raised my eyebrow and smiled. Yeah. He jumped up eagerly, then caught himself trying to play it cool. I mean, sure, if you want to. Let's go. I grabbed their hand and ran for the door, snatching my strategically placed backpack on the way. Alex was too distracted to notice it, walking even faster than I was. It wasn't until he stumbled over the train tracks that Alex finally noticed the backpack. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. You can't be serious, Katie. No, Alex said, his voice rising. Just for a little while, I pleaded. We'll get back before anyone notices we're gone. 2 hours max. Please, Alex. I'm leaving in 5 days and I want to have one real adventure before I go. Alex stared at the tracks, his face a battleground of emotions. I held my breath until he finally let out a deep sigh. Fine. But we followed the tracks the entire time, and we turned around exactly at 1 hour. No arguments. Deal. I hugged him impulsively, my heart racing with excitement. It would be the first and last time I'd ever embraced him. As we walked, we talked about everything and nothing. Summer memories, favorite movies, what high school might be like. We stopped occasionally to make sure we were still following the tracks, which were becoming increasingly overgrown. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy above, creating strange shifting patterns on the forest floor. Alex checked his watch and frowned. That's weird, it says 5 o'clock. What? No way, we just left after 2. Your watch must be broken. I gave him a shove, but my stomach tightened with unease. Alex raised an eyebrow. Even so, we should probably head back. He wasn't wrong. The shadows were stretching longer by the minute, and looking around, I wondered if it really could be 5 o'clock. The forest felt different now, denser, older somehow. But I wasn't ready to give up. As we'd been walking, I noticed something taking shape off to our right. A large mass, perhaps a quarter of a mile away. It was more concentrated than the surrounding forest, with clean artificial lines that didn't necessarily belong in nature. Alex, look at that, I pointed. He turned, shoulders tensing. Yeah, I was hoping you hadn't noticed it. It's too far off the tracks, though. We'd never find our way back. Yeah, we would. I pulled the spray paint triumphantly from my backpack. It's for marking the trees. Alex took the can and shook it, then made an experimental X on a nearby trunk. Okay, fine, but I do the painting. I didn't argue. The deeper we went into the woods, the more the trees seemed to press in around us. Alex marked each tree with a bright red X, but somehow the paint looked strange against the ancient bark, too new and too artificial, like we were defacing something sacred. About 10 minutes of walking, we found ourselves in a small clearing. There, rising before us, was what remained of an old stone church. Its gray walls were nearly black with age and moss. The roof partially caved in on one side, but what struck me the most was how wrong it looked. The architecture wasn't like I'd ever seen before. The angles seemed slightly off, as if whoever built it had only a passing understanding of how buildings should be built. Holy shit, Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. We actually found something. I pulled out my camera with trembling hands and took a picture of the church's facade. Above the wooden door was a weathered plaque, its text long since worn away by time and elements, but there were other markings carved into the door itself, strange symbols that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them for too long. Let's try to get inside, I said, my voice sounding distant in my own ears. Alex hesitated. Katie, maybe we shouldn't. Something feels off. He was right. Everything about this place felt off. The air was still. It was heavy. Even the birds had gone silent. But I'd come too far to turn back now. Just a quick look, I promised. 5 minutes. Tops. Come on, Alex. He gave in. The front door wouldn't budge no matter how hard we pushed, but as we circled the building, we found a smaller door at the back that opened with an agonizing creak. The sound echoed through the empty church like a scream. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Rotting pews lined a narrow aisle, leading to what I initially thought was a pulpit. But as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized it was something else entirely, something that made my blood run cold. It was a crucifix, but unlike any I'd ever seen before. The paint had worn away everywhere except for 2 places. The face, which seemed to stare directly at me with an unsettling intensity, and the wounds, which looked fresh, as if they were still bleeding. I stood frozen, staring at the crucifix, when a sound like stone grinding against stone echoed throughout the church. The noise seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating off of the walls until my teeth ached. "Did you hear that?" Alex whispered. Before I could answer, we heard it again, closer this time, and unmistakably coming from beneath our feet. The floor vibrated with each grinding echo, dust raining down from the rotting beams above. "There's something underneath the floor," Alex said, his voice trembling. He took a hesitant step forward, and a floorboard creaked beneath his weight. He froze, then deliberately pressed down again. The board gave a hollow sound. "Alex, don't." But he was already on his knees, brushing away decades of dirt and debris. My flashlight beam revealed what looked like an outline of a trapdoor, its edges carved with the same strange symbols that we'd seen on the church entrance. "I think we need to leave," I said. The grinding noise had stopped, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. Even the dust in the air seemed to hang motionless. Alex ran his fingers along the edge of the trapdoor. "Now there's something down here. Do you want to know what happened with this place? To all those people?" I did. God help me, I did, but everything in my body was screaming at me to run. The crucifix's eyes followed our every movement. And the wounds, I swear they were dripping now, fresh crimson trails appearing as we watched. "Just 2 minutes, we're already here," Alex said, fingers curling around the iron ring embedded in the trapdoor. "We look for 2 minutes and we leave." I should have said no. I should have turned and ran. But instead I watched in horror as Alex lifted the heavy door, revealing a staircase descending into absolute darkness. A wave of hot, stale air rushed up from below, carrying with it the smell of ancient stones and something else. Something that made my skin crawl. The beam of my flashlight disappeared into the void below, unable to reach the bottom. But as we stood there, peering down into that impossible darkness, I heard something that still haunts my dreams. The grinding sound grew louder, and with it came a smell, like wet stone and ancient decay. Alex's grip on my hand tightened. "I think we should run," he whispered. We scrambled up the stairs, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. The sound behind us was deafening now, each impact shaking loose decades of dust from the ceiling. I lost my footing halfway up, and Alex hauled me to my feet with surprising strength. "Don't look back," he screamed. But I did. What I saw in that moment changed me forever. The thing coming up the stairs wasn't stone anymore. It was alive, its surface rippling like liquid metal. Its face was strange and abhorrent. We burst through the trap door, and Alex tried to slam it shut behind us, but something caught it from below. The wood splintered as massive claws punched through, leaving deep gouges in the ancient timber. "The door!" I screamed, pointing at the church entrance. "We have to get out." We ran for it, but the door wouldn't budge. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to writhe and shift in the dying light, and behind us, the trap door exploded upward in a shower of splinters. "The windows!" Alex grabbed a piece of broken pew and hurled it at the nearest window. The glass shattered, but the opening was too high to reach. "I'll boost you up," he said, already lacing their fingers together to make a step. "Katie, go!" "I'm not leaving. You have to. One of us needs to make it out to tell." The rest of his words were drowned out by an inhuman roar that shook the very foundation of the church. We both turned to see it rising from the hole in the floor. Tall, its horns scraping the ceiling. Its face. Alex shoved me toward the window. "Now!" I put my foot into his hands and he boosted me up. The jagged glass cut into my palms as I scrambled through the window, then turned back to help Alex. But Alex wasn't there anymore. The creature caught him. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as it lifted Alex off the ground with one massive claw. He didn't scream. He just looked at me with an expression of absolute terror and mouthed one word: "Run." So I did. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I ran until the sun set and rose again. I ran until I couldn't remember why I was running anymore. When they found me 2 days later, I was wandering along the train tracks, dehydrated and delirious. I told them that Alex was still in the church, but when the search parties went to look, they found nothing. No church, no clearing, not even our spray-painted X's on the trees. The camera was gone too, along with every picture we'd taken that summer, even the ones from the day before. Pictures of us riding bikes, swimming in the lake, sharing ice cream. All of them vanished as if they had never existed. And my parents don't remember Alex. Nobody does. The house where he lives stands empty now. And when I asked the neighbors about the family that lived there that summer, they just looked at me strangely and said the house had always been vacant. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, but then I look at my palms, where thin white scars trace the pattern of broken glass, and I know it was real. Alex was real. And somewhere in those woods, that thing is still waiting. Because of us. I never went back to Montgomery Vale after that summer. My mother finished her work remotely, and we sold the house without ever returning. But last week, 22 years later, I received a letter. No address, just my name written in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photograph, worn and yellowed with age. The image showed two 13-year-olds standing in front of a half-finished housing development, mountain bikes leaning against a tree behind them. One of the kids was me, unmistakably. The other was Alex. The photo was impossible. All of our pictures had vanished that day, but there it was, solid and real in my trembling hands. I turned it over, and on the back, written in that same unsteady hand, were 3 words. Still finding me? I burned the photograph that night, but it didn't matter. The dreams have started again, and now when I look in the mirror, I catch glimpses of strange symbols appearing in the glass, like the ones carved into that church door. They fade when I blink, but I think I know what they mean. That it isn't finished with us yet. And somewhere in Vermont is a town called Montgomery Vale. The train tracks still lead into the woods, still waiting for someone else to follow them, still promising answers to questions that should never be asked. And if you find yourself there, remember this: some things aren't meant to be found. Some memories should stay buried. And if you hear about the lost town or see strange symbols carved into ancient wood, or meet someone who seems too eager to show you the old paths through the forest, run.